Welcome, friends. So glad that you have joined us today. And a special welcome to Stefan Merrill Block, who has just written a blockbuster memoir, Homeschooled. I'm so glad that Stefan can join me. I've had the pleasure of knowing Stefan for some years, but this book is an especially tender and provocative description of a childhood kind of gone awry for a period of years. And Stefan has a lot to contribute to the conversation about what is school about, what is life in a crazy family about, how do we all tend to emerge into our adulthood formed and ready to go. Stefan, I want to share the first words of this wonderful review by Fiona Sturgis that was in the Guardian recently, I guess last week. Is that correct? The first paragraph kind of lays out the premise, but then I'm going to turn it over to you to offer your own way of talking about what it is you've written here. Fiona Sturgis writes, Stefan Merrill Block was 9 when his mother pulled him out of school. It was the early 1990s, and the family had recently moved from Indianapolis to Plano, Texas, where Block's father had started a new job. While Block and his older brother Aaron had been wrenched away from their schoolmates, their mother had left behind work, a social life, and her best friend, and found herself isolated and rudderless. But then she discovered a new purpose, taking charge of her son's education. And maybe with that intro, I'll turn it over to you to kind of frame for us what you've written about.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping we can slip in some more block-related puns. That was nice. I'm so happy to be here. So yeah, a little bit more framing. My mother pulled me out of school when I was 9, halfway through 4th grade. At the start of it, it seemed like it was going to be a one-semester experience. She wasn't happy with the teacher I had at the time. It seemed like I was going to go back in 5th grade, but as that semester wound to an end, it became clear that this was going to be an extended stay. And it went on for 4.5 years in the end until I kind of argued my way out for high school. And those years became just increasingly isolated. I had friends at the school before we began homeschooling, and one by one, they kind of fell away. I was still doing some extracurriculars, and those kind of fell away. And over that time, also, it became, I guess, maybe euphemistically, became increasingly eccentric. This time I spent alone with her. I'm sure you're going to have questions related to the exact nature of that eccentricity. But
I'll press you a little bit. Well, as a matter of course, this review says it is titled "A Compelling and Fitfully Harrowing Child's Eye Account of a Mother's Unraveling." Yeah. Anyway, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think she was dealing with a lot at the moment. As that reviewer said, she had recently, we'd moved to Texas. She had lost this amazing job. She had this rich social network. Her mother, my grandmother, was experiencing the sort of early mid stages of dementia, far away in New Hampshire. And I think she was kind of rudderless, and she decided that my school was badly failing me, and that she also decided that I was like a generational level genius, and that you shouldn't laugh so much at that.
I love it. No.
It's of course. But that she would literally take out books from the library that were like history biographies of sort of children's biographies of Einstein and Newton and Da Vinci, and compare where I was at age 9 versus where they had been at age 9, and like try to convince me I was like kind of smarter than Da Vinci because of her reading of it.
Did you buy it, by the way?
No, I know, of course. I mean, it was sort of like in the way 9-year-old thinks of Santa Claus, which is like most of them know by that point it's not real, but they know that their parents seem to need to continue this story, and they kind of enjoy participating in the story as well. Like I never believed her, but I enjoyed the story of it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And yeah, and so as time went on, it began with something that really resembled homeschooling. Like we had a couple hours a day at the dining room table where we would always do a math class. Sometimes we would do some other subject a bit, but it didn't take long for it to winnow down to just math and sort of just an hour. And then I started to just do my math by correspondence. So essentially we weren't doing any curriculum. And what she felt, what she believed was that I ought to be free to pursue my genius passions and curiosities. And so I was largely left alone to, read what I wanted, to write what I wanted, to watch a lot of daytime television as I wanted. We spent a lot of our days at the shopping mall. We would go out to 2 hour long lunches and things. I think it became revealed over time that really what she was after was time alone with me and to sort of have me to herself. It seemed like the primary motivation. I think that when I had been like 3, 4, the last sort of peak years of my toddlerhood, I think that had been a kind of peak represented a kind of peak for my mother. Like she had this child at all times next to her who needed her so badly, whose love for her was so immense. And I think that she saw every day away from that moment as a kind of, as she received as a kind of loss. And she was determined to bring back that toddler in more ways than one.
But interestingly, not your brother, who was a
Yeah.
few years older than you, right?
Yeah.
And he continued in regular school,
Yeah.
right?
He got on the bus every morning. We would see him off and we would say bye-bye, Aaron. And then we would, go shopping or something.
So within that environment, and as you look at it now, her reason for, quote, homeschooling you was because you were special. You needed to be treated in a way that would allow you the freedom to grow into your excellence, whatever that might happen to be. Is that correct?
I would say that's the majority of it. She also had this other theory that she would talk about, that my brother and my father, she created this sort of division in our family, so that she and I were sort of a family within the larger family of four. My brother and my father were in like the outer ring. In the outer ring, those people were what she called linear learners, and those were people who needed structure and some sort of regimentation. And they would, given the immense freedom of what she called unschooling, they would flounder. She believed that she and I were people who suffered from structure, who suffered from curriculum, and that our brand of brilliance could only be brought to light through an exploration of curiosity and through what you call a free form education.
I mean, we can get into some more specifics of your experience in a moment, but I will observe that here you are, having grown into a successful author. Was there some merit to her wisdom in
Did it
this?
work?
Did it work?
It's a question I think about a lot. There's I think a deep ambivalence at the heart of this book. I mean, there are several deep ambivalences, but that's one of them. Is she believed specifically that I was going to be a writer. Like she was really cultivating me to be a writer. I think she had literary aspirations that went unfulfilled. And she wanted me to be that person. And so like my childhood resembled, like the ways I spent my days is identical to the ways that I spend my days now, where I was like alone in a room reading books and then writing stories of my
It's
own.
curious.
Yeah. And in some ways, like, I think that I was, and maybe still am, even though she's been gone for 5 years, trying to live up to some idea of who she thought I should be. But it was so determining of the path my life would take. I think that when people have pushed back, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later in the conversation, about my calls for reform to homeschooling. One of the ways in which they push back is they say something like what you just said, like, oh, this book was on the New York Times bestseller list, like surely like it'll work. And I don't know, like necessarily why having like a semi-successful book in the world is a sign that it worked. Like I mean, I feel like maybe it definitely made me into a writer. I love my work. I love my I love books and I love writing. Might I be happier in some other way? Probably. Like writers are not especially happy people, we're isolated all the time. And for me, like I have tried and failed to work in companies and on teams, and it's never felt right to me. And like isolation is what feels correct to me. And I'm like in a lifelong struggle against that tendency.
You think that was a learned behavior or your essential nature? Now, because a lot of the theme in the book was your loneliness
Yeah.
and your isolation.
Yeah.
Do you have
I
a
think it's
point
a
of view
learned
on that?
behavior.
You do.
Absolutely.
You do.
Yeah. I think back to the kid I was before, and I was the class clown. I was like the cut up, and I was like, I had this like rich social life. And I think what happened was in these years, I mean, it's hard to. This was actually like one of the central questions I had in my mind as I was writing was how to convey what loneliness feels like, that level of loneliness.
I felt you working on that in
Yeah,
the book. Yes.
because it's foreign. I just think like my children go one Saturday, like a snowy Saturday, and they don't get to see other kids, and it's like physical agony for them.
Yes.
This was 4.5 years
Yes.
of often not seeing anyone else for weeks other than my immediate family. Like the isolation was immense, and I think that what I did with that was I found another way to be with people, and that other way was through reading and then writing. It was when I would like read a novel, I would feel so connected to that character's fate, and then I felt like my first attempts at writing, at least, even if they were not great, but they were a way to speak back into that place where these books had come from. Um, and I think that it was a rich interior world that started to become comfortable to me. I think I was also,
Well, maybe life-saving.
life saving.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's like a what my therapist might call like a sublimation, or
Yeah.
of like an unhappy situation. I sort of think it's like when people push back in that way about like, well, your homeschooling made you into a writer. I feel like this isn't a perfect analogy, but the analogy I think of is colonialism. And I think of like all the train tracks that the British left behind in India. And they're like, but they helped you modernize as a nation. It's like, yes, but we probably still should not have had
Yeah.
colonialism. Like you shouldn't have,
Right.
taken control of our fate in our country.
Right.
So I feel kind of similarly, like, yes, there are.
Well, silk purse out of sow's ear kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um,
Well, on that top, pushing the isolation a little bit, because it's such a recurrent theme in the book, and you come at it a couple of different ways in a variety of ways, the isolation felt abusive. And I'm wondering if you would use that phrase for that isolation. And then, as you and I have talked informally on other occasions, I've said, Stefan, what's so remarkable about this story and the way you tell it is that you have a lot of tenderness in the way you are talking about your experience and who your mother was. And at the same time, there's this thread of what I interpreted as abusive behavior that was kind of recurrent through it. And I'm kind of curious,
yeah.
can you speak to that? You know what I'm talking
I
about.
do know.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. As I've written 3 novels before this
Yes.
book, and I'm back to fiction now, I think.
Yes.
um, the sort of axiom 101 of the fiction writers workshop is show, don't tell.
Yes.
And I think after writing 3 novels, it's become second nature in my writing to not necessarily draw conclusions for the reader. And I think I respond more to books that are written that way, where sort of
Yes.
the behavior and the characters are there for the reader to come to judgment.
Yes.
I think it's actually like not a bad philosophy. There's not a bad way to move through life if you can, as far as you can. Um, I think in this case, I wanted to show. I just wanted to put on the page what happened to me. I mean, I felt like after my mother died in 2020 at the sort of peak of the pandemic. We were separated by hundreds of miles. I was in New York, she was in Texas. And we just had a newborn baby. And so I watched her death kind of play out on FaceTime. I couldn't be with her. It was, this moment of just tremendous existential upheaval. And after she died, I just had this very strong feeling of like, it's like this central relationship in my life that just vanished. And it felt like, a lot of my childhood was vanishing along with her. And if I didn't put it down on the page in some way or like do something with it, then it was like I was a last witness to. It was like I was the I like to say I was like the last surviving member of a nation of two, and I needed to put it down. And that's how the book really began, was just out of this like need to record and need to like remember and to see what was still there that I could retrieve. And I guess also to some degree, she was pretty young when she died, and our work together was not at an end, and our relationship was unresolved in a lot of ways. And I think I needed more time with her. So I think those were like the guiding impulses. When I got to finally to the stage that I like shared it with people, um, I felt, especially in like the last drafts of it, that it was important for me not to come down on one side or the other of what this relationship was. We spoke earlier about ambivalence, and like that. I think the ambivalence of this relationship is just like felt really critical to me to capture, which is um someone can so badly mistreat you, they can even abuse you, but it doesn't wholly negate your love or for them or the gifts that they give you as well.
I
And
agree.
sometimes the gifts are the abuse on some level, and that they come in the same stream. It's the two sides of the same thing. Um, I have been in. My therapist likes to say that I left it to the readers to do my dirty work here, because I put it all out, honestly, not knowing what readers will make of it. Are they going to think that I am just complaining about nothing? Does it all seem kind of banal, and like, is it unpublishable? And then since it's come out, it's like, do people read it as abuse? Do they read it um as something worthy of attention? And to hear from readers that they do think of it as something worthy of attention, to hear from the people who, I mean, not everyone does, but a lot of them do. Um,
Well,
and then the people who say it's abuse, I feel kind of validated by it, because I feel like that's not a word I would have used, but it felt like a deep pain I was carrying. And I think that survivors of abusive situations often, especially when isolation is one of the major characteristics of the abuse, often struggle with this question, like, was it just in my head? Is this all in my head? Am I misremembering? Am I making too much of something?
so if I come to you and say, gosh, Stefan, this reads like abuse,
Yeah.
I mean, uh, that helps inform your own opinion of what actually happened. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly right. And to have,
So the reader actually participates in your own processing of what you're writing about.
yeah, this is like a tremendously healing
Yeah.
experience for me,
Yeah.
the publishing of this book. I mean, sometimes I've gotten the other reaction as well, which doesn't feel good, but for the most part, I hear from readers every day about, their own abusive situations, and sort of, um, it happens at almost every reading that there's a reader in the audience who thinks that I ought to be angrier, and they're kind of angry on my behalf. And I kind of, I feel moved by that.
Well, that even crossed my mind too,
Yeah.
um, as I was reading it. Not so much what you should be,
Yeah.
but more like, why aren't you angry? It's sort of like that. Or why isn't there more anger represented in the book? Because it isn't an angry book.
Yeah.
It is, it's very artfully presented, because you deal with very nuanced material. And as I said earlier, in a tender way, but also in an accurate way, a descriptive way that brings some adult sensibility and interpretation on the events that are happening. And nevertheless, you never lose the child's perspective of what's
Thank
going
you.
on. It's really quite wonderful in that regard. And that does invite the reader into the story in a way, as you've described it. But I'm intrigued by the fact that it is the reader's response that can help you interpret actually what went down as a result in this way.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, though, here in this part of our conversation, could you put some flesh and bone, as it were, on what some readers have felt was abusive? I mean,
Yeah.
even this, the reviewer says, Homeschooled moves into the realms of psychological horror with shades of Mommy Dearest, Misery, and an undercurrent of Tara Westover's Educated. I mean, it's kind of curious. That's a strong response from a reviewer, right?
Yeah.
What they read into it.
Yeah.
But that isn't the energy that you present in the book. But I'm kind of
Yeah.
still curious if you could describe for the listeners, what are people talking about here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will answer that. I want to, you said something earlier that I want to also like, focus on for a second,
Yeah,
if we could,
yeah.
which was about anger and why it's not angrier.
Yeah.
And I think, as you're, it's the same question my therapist asks me. and, I think that it has something to do with, um, anger being so dangerous in my house as a child. Like my mother was so angry. And if you expressed anger back at her, she received it as betrayal. And the price of betrayal growing up was, um, when it was just her and me in the house, she would do this thing where she would give me the silent treatment and she would shun me essentially. And when you have one person in your life, and you're a child, and that person is your teacher, your only friend, like
Yeah.
your world,
Yeah.
and they're not speaking to you, it's the pain of that is just immense. And
Well, that's also exacerbates the isolation.
yeah, no, it's exactly, it's like a solitary
Yes,
confinement.
exactly.
And so that's what anger earns you. Like it's hard for me to unlearn that response to my own anger. And I also, I think that when I finally started to tell these stories of what had happened in my childhood, I know I told them as jokes. I would, they're like,
Yeah.
cocktail. I mean, I'm sure I told some
Yes,
to you
you did.
before the book was written. They're like cocktail party conversations.
And we did laugh.
We did laugh. Yeah. And it was like the first step toward claiming control of the narrative, I think.
Yeah.
And this book lands somewhere that's maybe like I feel sort of more empowered toward anger now than I ever have. So maybe at some later stage it'll be another thing that sounds.
Well, that
angrier,
makes
but
perfect sense.
yeah.
I mean, I didn't have a difficult childhood. I mean, I had my issues, but I didn't have a difficult childhood. But I would tell you that part of my own maturational journey was becoming acquainted with my actual emotional life.
Yeah.
And at the heart of it, I think, was a fear of anger myself,
Yeah.
because I was afraid of my own anger or
Yeah.
what would lurked in there. So my own personal breakthrough over the years came with a final recognition that was my journey to be on, is
Yeah.
to the embrace of my emotions, to learn that I could actually be angry and
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. My anger still, yeah. I mean, I think I'm on a similar journey.
Yeah.
So,
But describe
Oh,
some
so
of those,
yeah.
some of these stories.
The stories, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so as I said earlier, my mother, her like peak life moment was when my brother and I, but really I was so little. And, when I was like 2 and 3, I had this just like white blonde hair that turned brownish around age 4. When my mother began to homeschool me, she had this like hope that it wasn't too late to restore my hair to its like rightful color. And her first step was to just make me spend a lot of the day in the sun. So we, and when the other kids were at school, I was just like floating around the pool, hoping that the sun would light she was hoping the sun would light my hair.
Right.
When that was only mildly successful, she resorted to more desperate strategies. Like we went to the store and bought some sun-in, which is like peroxide
Right.
plus some other chemicals.
Lemon juice.
Yeah. So I don't know what's in sun-in. And then she was spraying that into my hair, and I would lay outside, and it did change the color pretty dramatically, but it was not at all the color she wanted. And so then she just started to pour hydrogen peroxide directly onto my head, which, I was like walking around with this great, I mean, my scalp was flaking off. My hair could like light the room when I turned off the lights. It was like, it was crazy what happened to my head. And then the other like kind of wilder episode that a lot of reviewers have referred to was, there was a moment when I was 12, and her best friend's son had just died, and she was in this moment of grief and of fear, I think, of that like she had such a strong identification with that friend and with that we all did with that family, and that this child could just die. And she became much more like protective and fearful in that moment. But she also like just, I think it was like the last big gasp of trying to return me to toddlerhood at age 12. And she read an article in a magazine. It was a study that someone had written, had conducted, that suggested that a crawling phase might be critical to an infant's development of motor skills. which is probably true. I don't know. But her takeaway, I mean, which the article in no way suggested, I'm sure, was that because my handwriting was like slightly below average, I what I needed was more time crawling around the house. And so she made me for months crawl everywhere I went. Like I spent the whole day on my hands and knees, except for when I was, sitting down working on something. But so I was like 12 years old with my hair bleached back to this blonde color, like on my hands and knees, and spending the whole day by her side. It was this kind of perverse theater of that time in her life.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it is well.
And you have a way of telling those stories and other stories that leave the reader laughing.
Yeah.
But it's a laugh with a deeply nuanced,
Yeah.
dark side to the laughter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why the people will come out saying this was a kind of a highly uh, curated, abusive environment in that regard.
Yeah.
Though she didn't smack you, she didn't, she
Yeah.
didn't physically hurt you particularly, but wow, it just was a highly intense
Yeah.
universe that you described and that you had to live through.
Yeah.
How did that survive within the culture of your family?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, uh, when I think every family has these silences, like these silences about parts of our histories that we just sort of agree not to speak about, or subjects that are taboo,
Yes.
um, for a variety of reasons. Um, And usually it's out of fear. So if you're afraid of how someone's going to react if you bring up this thing, that's the unmentionable. The unmentionable in my family was my mother. No one could speak about her unless she was present, and then no one would dare say anything negative. So even when we weren't with her, my brother, my father, and I never. We reached a point where we never spoke about her. Like we would never say like, wasn't that
It was
a?
off limits.
It was off limits because she had created this sort of like fear-based state where it's kind of like a secret police where she was always sort of casting one of us out, like she, and then ganging the others up against that person and kind of trying to coax secrets, so if one of us said something negative about her to the other, like if I said something bad about her to my brother, I was afraid that my brother was then going to tell her that I had said it so that he could earn his way into the inner circle and get me cast out. It was like that kind of a dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So we had never spoken about any of it. And then, as she was dying, my brother and I started to talk about how we really felt about her and our childhood. And it was just shocking, like what was there for both of us. I knew it was there for me, but he had his own long and complicated narrative. In that conversation, he said, I said, were you ever jealous, that we would see you off to the bus every day as we like were, spending the day at the shopping malls and by the pool. And he said, no, I was like, I was never jealous. I felt lucky. I felt sorry for you. That's what he said. That,
It's
that it was
fascinating.
you. Yeah. Um, and then something similar happened with my dad where I, I told him the book was coming. I was very anxious about how he might receive it. He and I had started to speak about her and it like more openly in advance, sort of around the writing of this book. But I knew a lot of it was just I kind of thought it was better in the language of the book for him to be able to read it and to sit with it and to really um to not just like react in the way you would in a conversation. I mean, on some level, I think that's part of why I wrote it was to share it with him.
Interesting.
And he, to his credit, received it with like a lot of grace and a lot of openness. And but he was very upset by it. And he, I mean, initially, and in shocked too, I think, because I think that he had felt that that I I think we had made the same assumption about one another, which was like, I thought after my mother was gone, he was going to be the sort of person in charge of maintaining her narrative in the family, like her version, her sense of like who we were as a group. And so in that way, like anything negative about her was going to be punished. I think he kind of thought something similar about me, that because she and I seemed so close, we were the family within the family, that he couldn't say the things to me that he thought and felt. And I think I mean, I know what was on the other side of these very difficult conversations of sharing the book with him was that I finally heard his version of things too. And that has felt like a tremendous burden off of all of us.
So there was an opening here
Yeah, for
in the
all of
last
us.
couple of years,
Yeah.
really, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it is really like, it's a cliche to say the truth shall set you free, but it is
Yes.
like, it just feels profoundly true.
It's a cliche because it is true.
Because it's true. Yeah. Yeah. And then, the truth felt, as that thought applied to my life, and I thought about it as I was writing this and trying to, and speaking with you, you were the third reader of this book or second reader of this book or
Yeah.
something. And I gave it to you because I was like, I had shared it with I think my friend John, who's a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe my agent at that point, and it seemed like it was maybe publishable. And so once it was maybe publishable, I wanted to like
Yeah.
ask you, like, what is this going to do to my life?
Right.
And should
Right.
I do these things to my life? And it felt like, you read other stories about people like speaking their hard truth or coming to terms with a secret, and you think it like somehow like I didn't draw perfectly the connection between that and what I was going through. What the weight of my secret of what was unspoken or unspeakable in my family felt too huge to do, and it felt. I mean, it still feels kind of insane that I've done it, like these things just felt unmentionable because of the conditions of our family and the way that I grew up. But in fact, speaking that truth and sharing the story has been like, it's transformed all of our relationships, like for the much, much better, I think.
Well, and we could probably add that it's probably helpful to a lot of people. Not that their stories are your story,
Yeah.
but because the way in the manner in which you've written the book invites entry into the story is a way for people to enter their own stories. I imagine it's
I hope
true.
so. I hear from people who tell me that, and that's like the most wonderful.
I don't know that that was your reason for writing it.
Yeah.
It sounds like the reason for writing it was deeply personal, even essential for you,
Yeah.
kind of an essential thing to do, right? And as I recall your own process of writing, it flowed pretty easily.
It was, yeah.
And the other thing that struck me, when I first read it, number one, I loved it immediately. And it was deeply felt. But I also said, because I have read your other books,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, the tone and voice of this book is very different.
Yeah.
And the way you use language is different. And it felt, I mean, your other books are excellent, but this book felt like the language was liberated in a way out of your own essence. Does that make
It
sense?
does, yeah. I mean, I think it's this lesson I'm trying to carry forward on my new novel. I don't know
Yeah.
how successful I'll be in it, but like, I think, with my three novels, I was, a lot of what's in those books was born out of a love for other books.
Yeah.
And I was sort of, thinking of the things I loved and thinking of the voices of those books. And,
Yes.
so those books grew out of a literary space. This book, of course, I've, after being a writer for 18 years, like I learned all these lessons of like how to write and what a book contains. But what this came out of was just a deep, urgent need to put these things down
Yeah.
and to feel seen and to share my story. And so like all of these questions of like, voice and perspective and what kind of a writer am I? What kind of elements are in my story? All of these things were off the table. It was just, I know exactly what I need to tell. And the question was like, how can I tell it best? And that's a very different question.
That's
Yeah.
kind of liberating too in its own way. isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. It's extremely liberating. I mean, I thought that's also why it was so easy because, from a craft perspective, the novel, you're just like burdened with this terrible freedom. And with a novel, you're also always like up against, uh, I find it in some ways like much more exposing than writing a memoir because a novel
That's interesting.
to me is like it shows everyone like what you're capable of and the limits of your imagination, the limits of your intellect, of your craft, of your empathy. Memoir, because it's confined by the events of what happened, you can't. It couldn't be much more than what it is, and like I found that like a very liberating idea.
It's a curious thing because on the other hand, you have to mine what is there
Mhm.
in a way that's really clear in its attention to detail
Yeah.
and nuance and to the authenticity of it, right?
Yeah. But it's, I also find like with fiction, you spend so much time trying to convince yourself in like the veracity of this character, get to know them,
Yeah.
get to feel the things they would do and wouldn't do, and then the world of it. You're like creating a whole world around them, and then the events of what they choose and don't choose to do. Like, and you're always asking yourself, like, is this bullshit, or
Yeah.
is this coming from a real place, or is this bullshit? Is this, you know? And with this book, like, it kind of some of it seems like bullshit, but it's not. You know? It's like- and that,
Well, no, that's part of its charm. You
yeah,
know, what's the charm?
yeah,
Yeah, and no, I get it. Uh, um, I know that there's been some conversation about the title of this book, Homeschooled, and the focus on being homeschooled. I know that wasn't your reason for writing the book, though. It
yeah,
wasn't a diatribe on what homeschooling is.
yeah.
And yet there's been some conversation about that, given the title of the book and so on. Can you say a word about homeschooling in that context and how
Yeah.
this fits into that and all of that?
I mean, I think when circle back to anger, um, it feels easier maybe to allow my anger at the crazy state of homeschool laws in our country than it does to just have its anger directed at my mother. But I think, on top of my mother's choices failing me, what failed me was the ridiculous laws in the state of Texas around homeschooling, which was, it's to this day, homeschooling had just become legal really in Texas in the early 90s. And it is then as now, there's really no kind of oversight at all. You don't even have to file notice with the state. You just pull your child out of school and you're homeschooling. There's no curriculum requirements. There's no tests of academic competency. There's no socialization requirements. There's no checks of health and wellness. I mean, unless there's like, maybe there's like reports of concern from neighbors or something. But in all my time as a homeschooler, nobody once came to check on me or to ask basic questions. Um, I don't know how much those things could have changed, but I do believe that if I was made to take regular tests and to regularly show work, maybe just on an annual or semi-annual basis, it would have changed things a lot. And especially if there had been some requirement of socialization outside the house, that would have helped me a lot, Um, in Texas, as in many states, there's also essentially no regulation of who is allowed to homeschool their child. So you could be, um, as long as you have custody of that minor, you could be a registered sex offender. You could have a felony record of sex crimes against minors, homicide. You could actually be, and this is often the case, of people who misuse homeschooling. You could be under active investigation by Child Protective Services and pull your child out of school into an environment where essentially no one is ever going to check. And what happens too often is, um, parents whose child has come to the attention of Child Protective Services, or at least the teachers at the school are thinking of that kind of a referral. They say, "Oh, I can just pull my kid out of school. No one will look again," and that's just what happens. And there's this amazing group of former homeschoolers have banded together to form something called the Coalition for Responsible Education, which is calling for reforms to these sorts of laws, which are on the books, and most, I mean, basically every state could use some improvement. There's like 17 of like this lowest tier regulation states, of which Texas is part, which just really like beggar belief. But that group also maintains this database called I think it's called the Invisible the Vanished Children of Homeschooling database or something, and it's just hundreds of stories of children who have suffered just a heinous abuse, and in many cases just they were murdered, they were disappeared, behind this veil of homeschooling, and people didn't know for years.
So what's from your vantage point now, what's the answer to this? Is there a role for homeschooling or not?
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
Um, Well, I believe that homeschooling is necessary on some level. I think like there are a lot of situations where a child's special needs aren't being met at school. Like maybe the school doesn't have the resources. A child is being bullied. Um, they, maybe culturally like feel so separate from the prevailing culture in which the school operates. Um, for that, and I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot
Yeah.
of good reasons to that homeschooling should exist as an alternative. I also still believe like there's something to this notion that my mother often recited that comes from the sort of pioneer of homeschooling, this man John Holt, who founded what he called unschooling. The idea of passion pursuit, of giving children the space and time to find what really excites them, and to sit with it in creative and maybe not overtly productive ways. I think that that can be, positive. Um, but I mean, I think what needs, like, what must happen is there must be some basic checks of, at the very least, of like health and wellness. Like children should not be left to the system with who knows who, and then never checked on again. It's crazy to me that you think of like all the procedures that are in place in school systems or in our like food systems to ensure children's health and safety, and then somehow by parents saying they're no longer in school, like they have, it's like a tyrannical state where they have absolute authority. And I think that has to change. And I wrote this op-ed about this
Yes.
subject.
We might make mention of that. Stefan did write an op-ed for the New York Times on this topic that you could search and find. It's well done. Yeah.
Thank you. I have been surprised by the reaction to that. I mean, a lot of people have written to express their support, and that I think, especially former homeschoolers have reached out to tell me that, like, these are the kinds of reforms that would have meant something to them. Um, I have received just a lot of hate mail about it. It angered a lot of people. And I think actually, even the op-ed aside, the existence of a book called Homeschooled that isn't necessarily positive angers a lot of people. This
Kind of in a knee-jerk way.
in a knee-jerk way. And it's somehow they see this call for, like, what I'm calling for is so modest. Like there are people out there who are former homeschoolers who went through abusive childhoods who think homeschooling should be abolished. I don't think that. I mean, what I'm asking for is just some basic checks of academic competency and health and wellness and
And
social
safety, just simple safety.
And it's better for the homeschool movement. And this is why I wish they would see that, like, the more that they try to strike down any kind of regulation, the more we get just horror stories. I mean, it happens a few times a year. There's just some unimaginable horror that comes out of this space of homeschooling where, a child has been chained to the radiator or left in a cage, or and that threatens the health of the movement going forward. Um, I feel like I must have tapped into something also that has to do with like a certain strain of Americanness that has this knee-jerk reaction, fear of institutions and authorities of any stripe. And I don't think it's a coincidence that homeschooling is an essentially American institution.
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah,
It's essentially American.
it is essentially.
It's adjacent to rugged individualism, right?
Yeah, it is like the sort of logical conclusion of rugged individualism. It's so interesting that a lot of the movement is so steeped in this mistrust of schools, which they see as somehow the arms of like government brainwashing or oversight. This idea that the government is indoctrinating the children, and we have to fight against that kind of indoctrination. In other countries, that's just seen as citizenship. You know what I mean? Like in Germany, where homeschooling is, I believe, illegal, like the kind of, or in America before the modern homeschooling movement, like let's say until up until the 70s, what now a lot of pro homeschooling advocates are calling indoctrination was just like citizenship. It was like how you become a member of the society. What are our shared values? And the place that a lot of us learned them was school. And I think in this moment with homeschooling, there's, I don't know, 3 million something. It's hard to actually even count how many there are because in a lot of places you don't register. So there's
That's
in a way
wild.
no way of knowing how many homeschoolers there are. But let's say 3 million-ish and growing quickly. You think like, this idea of like common citizenship, of shared values, which those people should be lending their voices to. Like, I want to hear from people who don't think that the whatever values at school are taught are correct. I mean, this should be the conversation that generates what are shared
Hmm.
values, and like that idea of a shared sense of identity is, I think, like what we so desperately need in this fractured moment. I think like this idea of like we're just running off to like live inside of these camps that are, extreme ideological camps on both the left and the right. And this happens in homeschooling on both the left and the right. It's dangerous, for the.
So there is a homeschooling on the left. I mean, we
Oh,
know
yeah,
about
yeah.
the right, but there is homeschooling on the left as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. There's same kind of argument that what is being taught at school is a kind of indoctrination, and that, it doesn't express our values. We want our children to feel freer, to not be, turned into, you know, capitalist conformists, basically.
Right.
I mean, and there could be something to that argument. I'm not saying that, or there could be
Right.
something to the argument on the
Yeah.
right as
Yeah.
well. Like, um, like maybe public education is forcing overly secular values onto children, and but it should be part of the conversation that I think that generates, what school is.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just loop back before we close. How did you emerge into the man you are? That question has, because I've known you,
Yeah.
I have been curious how you interpret your own emergence as a husband and as a father. I know you have two beautiful daughters. Um, Say a word about this. Where did Stefan come? The Stefan we see sitting here with us.
Yeah.
How did Stefan emerge?
Um, I don't know exactly, but this is the subject of what I'm writing now. I feel like that this novel is really, and it's this memoir rather, is really focused on the conditions of my childhood, and then the sort of painful legacy of that elements of the childhood into adulthood. But you're right, what it doesn't really talk about is like, or quickly
Right.
describes, is like the sort of next step out into the big world. Um, I don't know. I mean, I will say, I think I talked about this a bit in the book, um, that,
I mean, you're a survivor on one level.
yeah.
And I should tell the listeners that as Stefan's description of coming out of homeschooling back into regular schooling, you're going to be laughing out loud on the floor at certain points in this story. And yet it was also traumatic. I mean, and dramatic
Yeah.
and traumatic, I
Yeah.
imagine. So part of that, I just want to alert the listener to that,
It's a big
that
part of
treat that's
Yeah.
in the book
Yeah.
as you move forward into it. But yet it's sort of it's part of the step of emerging into who you became. And you
Yeah.
survived and thrived ultimately.
Yeah. I felt very critical to me that when high school began, that I go back. At that moment, homeschooling was still so new that we weren't certain at all that you could go to college for homeschooling.
Remind us when we're talking about early 90s.
This was
right?
1995, 96.
95.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went back in 96. And I thought, if I don't do this now, this is it. I'm like going to be in this house with my mother, until she's gone. Like that,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, it was a great trauma, as you will read.
Yes.
Read the book. But I also always felt like I was dangling over this void, which was like my future being nothing, and having like opportunities taken from me. And I think that fear of like, I have to work so hard to keep myself from that fate was extremely motivating. And the other side of it is, my mother had this narrative where she had, believed in my abilities so profoundly that she had given the peak years of her own career to my fostering my development or something. And I think it felt to me, I mean, I know this, and at some level, it still feels like this to me, that if I don't excel in the ways that she thought I should, then it was so crushing to her. So it's like I was protecting her by succeeding, and the only way to do it was to push myself harder and harder. And so in that way, like, it's an unhealthy cycle, but it pushed me out into success. It wasn't success at first, but then eventually it was success, and it earned me a space out in the world.
Right. But you also emerged reasonably healthy and intact as a human.
Yeah. I mean, I think it took some time to find,
I understand.
my shape. And I think, one thing I think about a lot is how after, I had spent 4.5 years, more or less in the sole company of a middle-aged woman. And I came out into the world where like the things that impress that person are not what impress 14-year-old boys.
There's a lot of humor in this in the book.
There is. And I think I studied other kids in this very deliberate way. And in a way that maybe I wouldn't have if I hadn't gone through this experience. And so I think it actually in some ways made me a more socially observant person, because I think I was like really trying to read cues and really trying to figure things out so I could find a place.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, Stefan. I think it's been really stimulating, and I really encourage my listeners to pick up a copy of Homeschooled. You will be pleased you did, and gratified, and it will open up your own inner universes as well, as we've discussed earlier.
Thank you, Simon. This is such a nice full circle moment after, you were the third reader of the book, and now here we are discussing it, and it is on the table. I don't think it would be here if not for you. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad I was able to be part of the process.
Me too.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Living in the Meantime with Stephen Bauman. You can find links in the show notes to Stefan Block's book, Homeschooled, as well as the New York Times article referenced in this conversation. To stay connected, visit StephenBauman.com for links to like, follow, and subscribe, along with updates on Steve's other projects, including Gaining Clarity, his concierge mentorship service. For early access to episodes, reflections, and additional content, be sure to subscribe on Substack. You can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We'll see you soon.